What kind of hero is Batman? It's a question with many answers. Is he a superhero, a champion of justice against the forces of evil like Superman? Is he an anti-hero, a violent revenant dishing out punishment to the vilest of criminals like the Punisher? Is he a goofy character with a magic belt of gadgets, or a serious character with a serious belt of non-magic gadgets? Ultimately, it's the push and pull between these two directions that has made Batman such an enduring character. He can switch from one to the other and appeal to an entirely different audience for an entirely different reason. I think that maybe the best Batmans are the ones who meet in the middle. I think it's become clear on this channel that I have a fascination with the ugly ducklings of franchises, and Batman Arkham Origins is definitely one of those. It's not a game you hear many people talking about these days. It received fairly middling reviews, and it's generally remembered by the people who played it at the time as the bad one, including by me. In fact, it's the only game in this series that I hadn't bothered to finish until making this video. The game's not even available on digital. You actually have to go and buy a physical copy if you want to play it. Can you even imagine? It seems that most people, especially Rocksteady, the primary developers of the Arkham series, are happy to let this one fade away into game history. Not entirely unreasonable, since they didn't actually make it. The game was instead developed by WB Games Montreal, and much like previous ducklings I've covered, like Mass Effect Andromeda or Borderlands the pre-sequel, it was their first game of this scale. However, unlike with those games, WB Games Montreal still exists, and in fact they're the primary developer on the newest Batman game, Gotham Knights, which is interesting. Maybe there's something more to this game, something we all missed the first time around. Maybe something that justifies making a video this long about it. Despite what the name might suggest, Arkham Origins is not actually a Batman origin story. The game is set 8 years before the events of Arkham Asylum, though based on the ages of everyone it really seems more like 20. Bruce is still early in his crime-fighting career, so much so that his existence to the people of Gotham is still in doubt, and he's still flying solo, no boy wonders to be found. Though he has old faithful Alfred as always. It's Christmas Eve, but there's work to be done, so against Alfred's suggestions, Bruce suits up and gets to work.
You do realize it is Christmas Eve, sir?
Would it shock you to hear that the game starts with you infiltrating a prison? Black Mask has broken into Blackgate Prison and is causing chaos, so Batman heads in to figure out what's going on. Unlike the thematic inversion of Arkham City's prison opening, this is closer to a cheeky nod. Origins is the first game in the series not to be set in a prison, with the open world just being Gotham City itself. Sort of, so we won't be staying here long. What Black Mask is actually doing in the prison is horribly convoluted, so we'll save that for a larger conversation later. The important information learned is that he hired 8 of the world's most deadly assassins to hunt down and kill the Batman, offering $50 million to the winner. It's a fine setup for the game. It sets up a lot of villains that will need to be faced throughout the game, but its mystery isn't quite as compelling as Arkham City. Why did a supervillain hire assassins to kill Batman isn't really much of a question. What this Blackgate introduction is really introducing isn't the story, but this game, and the particulars of its presentation. While it may not be clear from the visuals alone, Arkham Origins has a visual presentation and style which is wildly different from the previous 2 games. It's most clear in the cutscenes, which are all quick cuts and aggressive edits, with lots of effects and loud musical stings. The cutscene introducing each of the assassins probably makes this the most clear.
Each of them gets one of these envelopes. I need them delivered tonight.
They're all hired killers, the best in the business. Black Mask isn't messing around. Slade Wilson, Deathstroke, former military, subject of a failed medical experiment.
Failed, you say?
The game has a more Jason Bourne-esque action movie vibe. The art style hasn't changed completely, but it has changed a lot. Batman has ditched the black pants and bodysuit for a bigger, more armoured suit, which veers much closer to the Dark Knight Batman costume. Most upsettingly, his pointy ears are shorter. I'm a fan of the pointy ears. The pointier the better, but clearly they grow up as he does. I don't really know how to put it other than... this game is so edgy.
I want teeth. I want answers.
Oh man, it's so fucking cool. This ain't your daddy's Batman. He wears armor and drops goons into Christmas trees. We gave our cutscene editors speed, so we're never gonna have a shot that lasts for more than 5 seconds, and all the menus are gonna have glitch effects because they're so real, man. It's almost to the point of parody how cool this game thinks it is. Here's one of the first cutscenes in the game.
Thought I caught your scent.
I know I caught yours.
This game will not let Batman be anything but a badass. Even when he loses, he's losing in a badass way. And let's get this out of the way. Batman is cool, which is why he doesn't need to try this hard. It reminds me of the first trailer for Titans, the one where we got the famous line, "Fuck Batman." It's supposed to make Robin seem cool, but ends up having the complete opposite effect. Arkham Origins isn't quite that bad, and I might not even comment on it if it wasn't being contrasted by the effortlessly cool Batman of the previous games. Arkham City never had to try this hard to make Batman seem cool. It's also partly because of the performance. Kevin Conroy did not return for this game, and Batman is instead voiced by Roger Craig Smith, who does a great job, but he plays the role much closer to Christian Bale than Kevin Conroy, which was definitely a deliberate choice. In fact, that's what a lot of this game feels like, a deliberate attempt to merge the aesthetics of the films with the Arkham games, and I don't like it. I don't have a super deep reason or anything, it just doesn't work for me and I find it very distracting. Speaking of things that don't work, I'd like you to meet my friend here. He's having a rough day. Arkham Origins is one of those games that you can actually see coming apart at the seams. Mostly to do with goons and walls, they just feel safer in the walls. The martial artist enemies have the ability to disable your attack button for a few seconds, which I don't think is intentional. Fight music will continue indefinitely until you restart the game. All the usual suspects in that regard. There's also some things that aren't bugs necessarily, but just feel off and unfinished. The grapnel is, like Arkham City, your primary mode of transportation. However, the grapnel is much more temperamental in where it wants to go in this game. It's hard to pin down exactly what's wrong with it, but you can just feel it as you're playing that it doesn't quite know where you want to go in a way that Arkham City never had issues with. There's also lots of ledges in the game that look like you should be able to grapnel to, but you can't. In games with a mechanic like this, the visual tell for whether you can climb or not is a flat wall versus a spiked or curved wall. You can climb up a regular fence, but not a barbed wire fence. Arkham Origins does have walls like that, but it also has flat walls that you cannot grapple to for no discernible reason, which would be annoying but acceptable, except that there are collectibles that require you to get up to these locations and you have to do so without grappling to them, almost as if they forgot or just ran out of time to add some spikes around the side of the building explaining why you can't just grapple up. The game in general is just lacking a level of polish that the previous games had, in more aspects than this, but we're saving the story conversation for later. It's not that the game is unfinished, it's just lacking in the finishing touches that make a game truly shine. The background of Origins is probably to blame for this. Here's the story. Warner Brothers wanted a new Arkham game because they're big and popular and they wanted to keep that money train going. However, Rocksteady told them that in order to make their next game in the series, Arkham Knight, they would need more time. They'd be building the game from scratch in a new engine for a new generation of consoles, and for the game to actually come out in a decent state, they needed way more development time than 2 years. It's actually kind of shocking that they had that kind of sway, to be honest, but hey, I'm glad it worked. To fill that gap, Warner Brothers went to one of their own studios and told them that they have 2 years to make an Arkham game. They were told it could not interfere or tread on what Rocksteady was doing in any way. They were handed Rocksteady's own custom engine to work with, and then they were told, do whatever you want. Frankly, under those conditions, it's actually kind of crazy that the game came out as polished as it did, especially since they also added an entire multiplayer mods. One of those classic, nobody asked for this but we did it anyway situations where 2 gangs would go head to head in a typical third-person shooter, while Batman and Robin worked in the shadows to take everyone down. I can't really comment on the quality of this multiplayer because I never actually played it. It was dead by the time I first played the game, and the servers were shut down in 2016, which means I cannot complete this game. Goddamn multiplayer achievements. Anyway, speaking of things that don't work, let's talk about the story. Much like the rest of the game, there's a level of polish missing from the story in Arkham Origins. The presentation is very slick, as mentioned, but the content of the story leaves something to be desired. That can be best demonstrated by just going through the first part of the game. The opening in Blackgate Prison is quite strong. It establishes Black Mask as an interesting villain, as well as the tension of 8 deadly assassins hunting you down. And on top of all that, it's Christmas Eve, and dinner's getting cold. After the introduction, though, things get odd from a structural perspective. The first one is one that Alfred actually brings up himself.
Sir, I may be stating the obvious here, but you do realize that since you and I are the only people who know the Batman's true identity, those assassins will all fail their mandate if you'd just spend the evening here.
They'll put innocents in danger to attract my attention. I can't take that risk.
The assassins are kind of a weird element because they're here to hunt the Batman, but actually Batman is out there hunting them. Except he isn't, he's hunting Black Mask. Because I guess if he catches the boss, all of the assassins will just stop, because they can't get paid anymore, which is logical, I suppose, but what isn't logical is how you go about this investigation. You see, in the prison, Batman saw a drone. It didn't really do anything, it just sort of flies past, so obviously Batman decides that the drone must be the key to all of this. And he sets off to find the owner of the drone, which it turns out is the Penguin. But he doesn't know where the Penguin is, and to find out you have to fly around and hack some walkie-talkies to discover his location, which turns out to be on board the ship that he owns, where he is currently running an underground fighting ring. I feel like he didn't really need the walkie-talkies to learn that information. One of the assassins, Electrocutioner, also happens to be participating in the arena, but it's fine because you knock him out in a single kick, which honestly is pretty funny, just because it's not the kind of joke you'd expect from the tone of the game so far. When you finally get to Penguin, he tells you that there was a murder at Lacey Towers, which was one of Black Mask's safe houses, and then Alfred tells you that according to the police report, Black Mask was the victim, which really doubles down on how pointless this whole thing was, because if Batman had just googled, "Where's Black Mask?", the first result would have been that he got murdered yesterday at Lacey Towers. When the first 2 hours of the game could have been skipped with a Google search, there's some problems with the story. This is also when the game throws Deathstroke at you, who happens to be the hardest boss fight in the entire series. The idea of the fight is that Deathstroke is basically an evil Batman, which means he has counters to all your moves and you'll have to play incredibly skillfully to beat him. The reality is that this fight is painfully slow and boring because you have to chip away at his health bar one counter at a time while not striking too much, because if you strike too much then he'll counter you. On the harder difficulties, this boss fight is a nightmare for that reason, because the health bar gets bigger and my patience gets smaller. Of course, this is one of those boss fights where some people find it really easy and will actually argue that it's one of the easiest fights in the series. And if you're planning to comment that right now, don't! Difficulty is subjective, okay? And if you doubt my pro gamer status, I have the 0 hit achievement as proof to the contrary. This combo of a long, boring and pointless investigation and an incredibly frustrating boss fight is, I have to assume, when a lot of people just give up on the game. Which is sort of a shame because the game does get better after this point, but I get it. At the very least, this segment of the game does give us one line that will live forever in my head for some reason.
Now there's a naughty geezer. Proper naughty.
Obviously, that's a masterclass of writing, but I don't think it's enough to keep people on board. Especially since by this point you'll have seen everything that the open world has to offer, and that might just be the most disappointing part of the whole game. As part of this 2 years to make a game scenario, the game of course reuses a lot of assets from Arkham City, including the entirety of the Arkham City map, just modified slightly so that it's no longer a prison. That sounds good in theory, a chance to see the city before it fell into ruin and chaos, and it certainly makes sense from a budgetary perspective, but I think the primary issue is that they didn't replace the ruin and chaos with anything. The city feels empty, everything is grey and clean. That might be partly because of the snowstorm and heavy fog that obscures the map, but I wonder if that fog is there to give the map more depth than it actually has. They made this unfortunately easy, since we can actually compare shot for shot the difference between the two games when it comes to the design of the city. Arkham City has a much more vibrant colour palette of oranges and blues and pops of red from Strange's propaganda signs, whereas everything in Origins becomes this dull grey-brown blur. There's a depth of detail in Arkham City's streets, with graffiti on every wall and barricades put up by the gangs and piles of uncollected rubbish by burned up and dead cars. And then in Origins the streets are just snowy and empty. I think maybe half the problem is actually in the sky. In Arkham City, the night sky is this colourful, almost dreamlike haze, which means there's this pop of dark purpley blue and orange behind everything. Where in Origins, because of the snowstorm, the sky is always a cloudy light grey, which makes the grey of most of the buildings blur with the background instead of contrasting against it. When we fly over to the new part of town, the one that's more built up and modern looking, things actually get worse, because at least the buildings in the old part of town were more ornate and their construction, and in fact can still look quite good in this game. My favourite area probably being the Bowery, where the Christmas lights everywhere contrast nicely against the cold grey sky. In the new part, it's just rows and rows of grey concrete boxes and a grey sky, with the only pops of colour being some light from the windows. It's not that it's bad necessarily, it's not an ugly game to look at, it's just unnotable, which makes a lot of the gliding around and collectible hunting much less interesting to do, especially since in this game the Riddler is in his pre-Riddler form, and instead of hunting his green glowing question mark trophies, you're just hunting these boring looking hard drive things with extortion data on them. The idea was clearly to make this look like a grittier, more realistic Gotham, but I don't think that was the right idea. Gotham is a character into itself, it's known for its weird artistic hyper-gothic flair, and by hiding it behind a grey haze, you're hiding a lot of the city's charm. I think I got distracted there talking about art direction and glazed over the fact that apparently Black Mask has been murdered, which is weird because he was at the prison at the start of the game. So you head to the scene to investigate, and it turns out he and his girlfriend were attacked by someone called the Joker.
Someone killed Black Mask, but this crime took place several days ago, and I saw Black Mask earlier tonight. The only answers I have raise more questions. Who is the Joker? Was he the killer here? Or is he one of the assassins? I have a body, an unknown shooter, and an unknown assailant who attacked the shooter. I need to match the DNA samples against the records in the National Criminal Database to identify who was in the room.
Yep, it's the Joker. Again, you watching this video, even if you've never played the game, have already figured out this twist. But we're going to go through a whole police station infiltration before we can confront the obvious that Joker has been pretending to be Black Mask. It's such an odd twist. During the marketing of Arkham Origins, they actually hid the Joker's role in the game from the marketing, focusing all on Black Mask and the assassins. The fact that the Joker is secretly behind it all is a big twist, or at least it's supposed to be, but for me this twist does not land at all. The main bad guy of the first two games is also the main bad guy of this game. Isn't really much of a twist, to be honest, and in fact, everything to do with the Joker in this game just raises way more questions than it answers. First question, what's Joker's plan? He's put bombs all over the city and has the detonators to blow them up because he wants to watch the world burn, I guess. But why is he waiting to detonate them? See, it seems like maybe he hired all of the assassins to keep Batman busy while he sets up all these bombs, but once he has them all ready to go, he doesn't detonate them for no reason? Is he doing all of this to screw with Batman? Because it really seems like he doesn't develop his obsession with Batman until after this. Second question, how on earth did the Joker pose as Black Mask for 3 days without giving himself away? I get that the guy wears a mask all of the time, but this Joker is absolutely insane and cannot keep his mouth shut to save his life.
Friends, assassins, welcome to our first quarterly performance review. As you can see here, Batman deaths are coming in far below projections.
There is no possible way that this guy was able to pose as a calm and collected crime boss for 5 minutes, let alone 3 days. And maybe he didn't, since his guys had this little mask switcheroo planned ahead of time. So did none of them slip up and mention that Black Mask has been replaced by an evil clown man? Why did he even decide to pose as Black Mask at all? How exactly does it benefit him to do that? Third question, what was he doing at the prison at the start of the game? Did he come in there just to kill the police commissioner? To what end? The police commissioner was super corrupt and in Black Mask's pocket. He wasn't there to break anyone out because he doesn't take anyone out with him, so the answer to all of these questions is that he's the Joker and he does crazy things because he's a real wacky dude. And that's an excuse to make the things he does in the game not make any sense whatsoever. Why does he set up an elaborate death funland in the hotel even though he's also set enough bombs to blow up the building? Because he's the Joker. Why does he kill the electrocutioner? Because he's the Joker. Why are so many of the typical mobster types so willing to immediately work for the homicidal clown man? Because he's the Joker. Why is he keeping Black Mask alive in order to get into his DNA scan bank vault when he doesn't actually care about money at all? Because he's the Joker, baby, and he don't play by your rules of doing things that make sense. The Joker in Arkham Asylum and Arkham City is crazy, but he still does things that make logical sense, and that gives him so much more menace. He's crazy, but he's also cunning. He's a criminal mastermind. He planned the events of Arkham Asylum weeks ahead of time. He poisons Batman because he needs a cure. This Joker is just making it up as he goes along, and the only reason he gets anything done is because he's the luckiest man on the planet. If he had held this assassin meeting with Deathstroke in the room, then Deathstroke probably would have killed him instantly, because clearly this guy has no intention of paying them should they actually kill Batman. In fact, what's he going to do if any of these guys come looking for their money? When Bane blows him up with a rocket launcher, he just fully accepts death. He doesn't know that Batman will save him. He's just like, well, it's been a good run. Guess I'll die now. Basically what I'm saying is they shot for Heath Ledger, but they ended up with Jared Leto. Thought I'd just interject here for a moment because you're probably getting the vibe by now that I don't like this game very much, and that's actually not true. I like this game just fine. I don't think it's an underrated gem or anything, but it's certainly got its moments. In fact, there's actually parts of this game that I genuinely love. There's just a lot of nonsense you have to get through before getting to that, so I wanted to stop here and highlight something that I actually like. This twist is actually the explanation for the game's title. It's not Batman Origins, it's Arkham Origins. While the details of Joker's plan and actions don't make any sense, the effect he has on the story and Batman do.
Not now, Alfred.
Sir, are you alright? Your voice...
I'm fine, Alfred. I've dealt with psychopaths before, but this...
Who the Joker is less important than what he represents. He's the dawn of a new era. Black Mask is a villain, but at the end of the day, he's just a mobster with a gimmick doing regular drug-related crimes. The assassins are the same way, sometimes a bit out there like Copperhead or Killer Croc, but they have a pretty basic goal. They want money. The Joker is on an entirely different level. He wants chaos, he wants to cause murder and destruction, and he has an incredible force of will to make that happen. As a prequel, we already know who'll follow in his footsteps. The Riddler, Two-Face, Poison Ivy, Mr. Freeze, Scarecrow. Villains who are more and more dangerous, more and more extreme. The game may do a poor job of writing the Joker personally, but the feeling that the game gives that the era of traditional, mundane crime in Gotham is dying, and something much worse is taking its place, that's done perfectly, even if it does run into the same old prequel problems that most prequels do. And although we've mostly been talking about the Joker, most of those problems are actually to do with Bane. While Joker's behaviour in the game is new and shocking to Batman, to the player it's expected. When we walk into the ballroom murder funland, it's just more of what we've come to expect from the Joker. What's new and different is Bane. The Arkham games usually do a pretty great job of capturing the spirit of the villains they're including. They take their own spin on the characters, sometimes in massively different directions, like gender-flipping Copperhead in this game, but for the most part, the character still shines through. To a lot of Batman fans, however, that had one major exception: Bane. Bane in both Arkham Asylum and City is mostly just a big veiny dummy, which is not a new characterization for Bane, but it's certainly not what he's known for. Something that came into sharp focus when between the release of Arkham City and Origins, a certain movie came out. I was born in the darkness, molded by it. You merely adopted it. Remember back when we all thought Bane impressions were the height of comedy? Fun times. Bane is generally characterized as not only stronger than Batman, using a substance called Venom to massively increase his strength, but also as highly intelligent, capable of matching Batman in a test of wits as well. Which is what makes him so dangerous. He's much smarter than he appears. People weren't big fans of Bane in the Arkham series, so for Origins they decided they were going to fix him. He has realistic proportions now, and talks much more, and has his own gang, and basically becomes the secondary main villain in the last hours of the game, because after you capture the Joker, the game just sort of keeps going. Bane isn't actually hunting Batman for the money, he's hunting Batman for the challenge, so it does make sense that he'd keep up the hunt. It's just quite odd from a pacing perspective. More importantly though, this is a prequel, and so it's kind of a massive question mark that this guy...
Move it along, big boy.
No, he's coming for you now, and when he gets here, I'm going to kill him. So you wait.
Turns into this guy.
Titan is too powerful to be used against me. I needed it all for myself. Now, do me a favor and die! Ah! Go!
Well, believe it or not, it's really dumb. Doubly so because they add more to this issue just to make it even more ridiculous. This is where those pesky prequel problems really kick into high gear, because we know that in 8 years Batman's identity is still a secret and Alfred is still alive, so the tension of Bane knows is kind of undercut by the more immediate feeling of, what? But that doesn't make any sense at all. Obviously you could apply that to the whole game. There's no tension in the entire game because Batman is still alive in the original game and therefore all of the assassins are going to fail to kill Batman. But A, I was never going to be worried that one of the assassins would actually kill Batman even if this was a standalone game. And B, there's a difference between a foregone conclusion and a contradiction. And I think it's very weird to make the basis of your story's climax figuring out how this isn't actually a massive plot hole. And, oh boy, we will get to the climax. Before you can get back to the manor to protect Alfred, you have to deal with one of the remaining assassins, Firefly, in a sequence on and under the big bridge, which is so much longer than I remembered. Not only is he burning random vehicles on the bridge, but he's also planted 4 separate bombs on the undersections of the bridge that you have to disarm. Initially I felt like this was kind of a weird filler mission, which it still kind of is. It's very long. However, it's also an important step in Batman's growth and journey through the game, which happens to be the best part of the game. But before we can talk about that, we need to talk about cops. You know I had to get here eventually. This game has so many cops in it, and its position on the police force is odd. Very odd. The police are personified by 2 characters in this game, 2 figureheads who rise after the death of the corrupt police commissioner. Captain Jim Gordon, the Boy Scout super cop who does it all by the book, and wants the police force to stand for truth and justice. And Brandon, the SWAT team leader who takes Black Mask's deal to hunt down the Batman and sends his entire squad out hunting for him. Good cop, bad cop to the extreme. The way things currently are with the GCPD is that essentially all of them are openly, terribly corrupt. And beyond that, most of them are just awful people. In fact, the entire system is broken. The game goes to extreme lengths to draw attention to that. Enigma's extortion files unlock audio logs of secret recordings, and most of them are just dedicated to how terrible this justice system is.
You wanted to see me, Warden?
Yes. I need you to reevaluate Julian Day.
Oh, didn't you see? I turned in my evaluation last week.
I saw it, and I need you to do it again.
I'm not sure that...
You have to understand, Day is a manipulator. A very experienced one, and you, well, you're still in your residency.
I don't see anyone doubting that Mr. Day is insane and should be tried as such. I'm actually considering writing a paper about him.
Miss Quinzel, I'm giving you a chance here. Do you know what happens if the prosecution can try Day as a sane man?
He'll get the death penalty.
And the city will thank you for helping to remove a cold-blooded killer from its streets.
So, we're not here to help rehabilitate the sick?
This is a prison, Miss Quinzel, not a mental health clinic. If you want to see a successful end to your residency, I suggest you keep that in mind and reevaluate Julian Day.
Gordon, he's so clean. I sometimes think he does it just to lord his integrity over the rest of us.
Easy, Gillian.
I'm telling you, Roman, it's time we took Gordon off the payroll. Permanently.
That's enough, Gil. A cop like Gordon is good PR for the PD. We get him under control, and he could be even more useful to us.
Control? It will be easier to send my men to beat some sense into him.
Like Detective Flass? That approach has already failed. Find a way to put a collar on the man, and it'll be that much easier to tighten the leash.
And how do I do that?
You want to eat, don't you?
Yeah, but...
Listen, I got you on possession, B&E, trespassing. Hell, I got you on loitering. So, what's it gonna be?
All right. What do I gotta do?
Simple. You get them riled up, you know? You blend in, you make suggestions. Hey, there's a fat cat, let's roll his car. Hey, let's burn that building down. Those corporate bastards put us out in the street. And if you have to, you kick in the first window. You throw the first Molotov.
But that's what they're gonna do anyway.
Yeah, so they say. But talk is cheap. No one wants to be the first one to do it. That's where you come in.
Ain't burning down a building gonna get me in more trouble than I'm already in?
Well, yeah. Well, that's what you got me for. I'm on your side, friend. You get him started, and then you get the hell out of there before us boys in blue start cracking heads. I'll make sure the heat doesn't come down on you. So long as you don't get yourself caught.
They're awful, and rightfully, Batman doesn't trust them or have any interest in working with them, which puts Alfred in this very odd position of being the constant cop apologist, constantly telling Bruce not to beat them up so much and ask for their help, and constantly calling the police even when Bruce tells them not to. It lands this game in a very odd place. The police are demonstrably awful, and have a heavy hand in the blame for why Gotham's crime is so extreme. But also, Batman needs to work with them to fix it. As mentioned, Gordon is the ultimate noble, selfless hero cop, and the idea is that under his leadership the police will become better, noble keepers of the peace. But will they? If we look to Arkham Asylum and City, then clearly not. The system that lets Arkham City be created is not a functioning system. The game makes things even foggier with the inclusion of Anarchy, the teenage anarchist, who, as you may expect, makes a whole bunch of extremely on-the-nose points about Gotham and the police and Batman. And his solution? Blow everyone up with bombs, because of course it is. Else you might start to wonder why you're on opposite sides. I opened this video with a question. What kind of hero is Batman? And this is when that question becomes an important one, because functionally, what is the difference between Batman and a cop? Obviously, what Batman does is illegal, but why? He beats up criminals and sends them to jail. That's what the police do also, just sanctioned. In a grimdark vigilante Batman story, often the only difference between Batman and the police is that he gets to do the violence that they aren't allowed to do. He's not restricted by their red tape, and that's why they like and respect him. That story comes with the tacit implication that if all cops acted like Batman, then we'd be able to clean up these streets in no time and everything would be much better, which, they do that already. And it's awful, and many innocent people die because of it. Why does the city need Batman? Is it because the cops are unable to stop the criminals? Or is it because they're part of the problem? That question can fundamentally alter the messaging and takeaway of a Batman story. I think it's clear from how many cops you punch in this game that the Arkham series does not hold a unanimously positive view of cops. They are certainly not shown to be inherently good and noble just because of the badge and uniform. But even after all that, I can't say that the game places the blame in the right place. What makes Batman better than the police isn't his lack of red tape, sure, but instead it's his moral standing. He's just a better person than they are. It's not that the entire system of law enforcement is broken and needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. Doing that would be crazy, akin to blowing it up and killing everyone. It's just that the station is full of bad apples, and we need the good apple to make it all good again. I would love to believe that that's enough, that all it takes is a good man taking power to fix the system, but I just can't get to a place where that's enough for me anymore. At least we can enjoy the cynical portrayal of law enforcement and the legal system while it lasts, because when we get to Arkham Knight, oh boy, that's the cynical political reading of the game anyway. There is another one that's much less dour and honestly quite refreshing, and that's the arc of Bruce Wayne, from edgelord to superhero. I mentioned how edgy the presentation of this game is. Well, as it turns out, not all of that edge is just there for flavour. The thing about this younger Bruce Wayne is that he's kind of an edgelord. He's angry at the world, he trusts no one, and the burden of saving Gotham is his alone to bear. The core relationship of the game is that of Bruce and Alfred, and honestly, aside from Alfred's love of the boys in blue, it's fantastically done. Some of the best character writing in the series. They have a strained but clearly loving relationship. Alfred clearly has some disapproval of Bruce's Batmaning, or more accurately, his flying solo attitude to it, and Bruce just kind of wants Alfred to shut up and let him go about doing his thing, because he knows better, of course. After Joker is captured, they get into a massive argument about it.
Master Bruce, stop! Master Bruce! Bruce, I will not in good conscience allow you to go. You're outmatched by these assassins. What? You're not some hardened vigilante. You're a young man with a trust fund and too much anger. You're in over your head and I don't want this to be your end.
Alfred, who do you see when you look at me? The boy whose shoes you used to tie every morning? The teenager you drove to his first date? While you are here every night, I am out there. The only thing between the innocent and the predatory.
Be.
No, not may be. I am.
When the mugger or the thief stops to think twice, that is fear. That is what I am. That is why they hired assassins, because I am the reason the criminals breathe easier when the sun rises. So no, Alfred, I am not in over my head. Tonight will not be my end, but it will be theirs.
But no matter how tense it gets, they won't let this argument break their relationship. They're family, and they feel like it. There's just so many small moments where that really comes through.
It's midnight, son. I just wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas.
You too.
What Alfred is saying is correct. Batman is really, really good. But as good as he can't do everything by himself. And what he doesn't realise is the hypocrisy of his own words. He says he doesn't need any allies, directly to the ally he is dependent on the most. Alfred is with him every step of the journey, feeding him information and helping him do basic things like opening doors and accessing security codes. He needs someone helping him to do that. When Batman is fighting Bane, and not doing a fantastic job of it, Alfred decides enough is enough and calls in Captain Gordon, who arrives just in time for Batman to escape. Maybe he could have beaten Bane and all of his men and Joker, but you know, it seems unlikely. The bigger proof, though, is when Firefly has taken over the bridge. Batman is able to disarm 3 of the 4 bombs, but is caught by Firefly before he can make it to the 4th one. However, when he goes to detonate the 4th bomb, nothing happens. Against his instructions, Gordon went in with the bomb squad and disarmed the last bomb. And thanks to that, many lives were saved that would have been lost. During this diversion, however, Bane attacks the Batcave and nearly kills Alfred, which is what makes Bruce truly understand that he isn't alone, and more than that, he cannot be alone.
Master Bruce, now is not the time for doubt.
I can't do it. I can't stop them.
No, you can't. Not on your own, but it's high time you realize that you are a man, not an island. And a man's strength comes not from just brawn and intelligence, but also from his allies.
One alert. The Joker has escaped from his cell and is leading the riots at Blackgate. Repeat, the Joker has taken over the entire prison. Multiple casualties, multiple hostages. Again, we have lost Blackgate. Captain Gordon is calling on anyone for assistance.
They need you.
No. They need us.
It's such a great emotional beat. Our little edgy boy has grown up and learned to accept help. It's a bit cheesy, sure, but for a franchise that can often be so dark and grim, a moment like this helps balance everything out. I just really wish it was enough to carry the game through the finale. So in the time since he was arrested, which has to be a maximum like 2 hours, the Joker has taken over the entirety of Blackgate Prison. It's a sharp and obvious return to the vibe of Arkham Asylum as you sneak back into the prison to stop the unfolding chaos. He's at the centre of the prison in the public execution panopticon, and he's come up with a fun little game to play. He's going to sit in an electric chair that's tied to Bane's heart rate, so if Bane doesn't die within a certain amount of time, then the Joker will be shocked to death.
So either you kill Bane...
No, I won't kill him.
But you will. You will fight me with all your resolve, or you will die. Someone is going to die. You, me, or the clown. The question of which one of us it is in your hands.
I have many questions. Let's start with the obvious one. How on earth did Joker set this up? I have to assume that you can't just link an electric chair to a heart rate monitor, right? Did he program this? With my very limited knowledge of code, even I know that would take way longer than 2 hours to figure out. Second question, why? I mean, we know why the Joker is doing it, because he's the Joker, baby. But why on earth did Bane agree to do this? Why is Bane even here? The last we saw these characters interact, he shot a bazooka at the Joker. But then the Joker proposed his heart rate monitor electric chair scheme, and Bane decided that was too great a plan to ignore. It's not like he came here because he knew Batman was coming. He knows Batman is actively hunting him down, and so he has the perfect opportunity to set up a trap, but he just doesn't. I guess he wants to have a fair fight with Batman, but then why do a bunch of goons drop down during the fight? That's not very fair. Why doesn't he tell anyone who Batman is? How does keeping that information to himself benefit him? Also, why did he take his mask off? Like, was he just getting too sweaty under there or what? Batman uses the resuscitation skills he just learned to temporarily stop Bane's heart and restart it in order to trick the game, at which point Joker scampers off and Bane takes some magic goo called TN1. Do you get it? It's like the thing from the first game. It's the ultimate magic plot hole removal goo. Not only does it bulk him up to his cartoonish asylum appearance, it also makes him dumber and selectively erases his memories.
While early tests had to be terminated immediately, the latest subjects seem at least physically stable. But side effects are severe. Immediate and permanent long-term memory loss, followed by a general degradation of brain function that leaves the subject primitive.
Oh gee, I wonder if he's going to end up taking this stuff. All of this is quite nitpicky, sure, and while I do think this big finale is a whole bunch of contrived nonsense, my biggest problem with it is that it has nothing to do with the theme of the game. It all focuses around the Batman does not kill rule, just like Arkham City, but that was never the central conflict of this game. The central conflict was that Batman needs to learn to accept help, and then he beats the final boss on his own? For the third time in a row, we've reached this idea that the end of a video game needs a big final boss monster. And for the third time, I have to ask, do we really need it? From a gameplay perspective, it makes more sense to do this fight solo. It's more satisfying to take Bane out on your own and feel like a badass doing it. From a narrative perspective though, it would make much more sense if Gordon somehow helped you win this final boss fight. If the two of you worked together to beat a foe that Batman couldn't beat on his own. Instead, after this fight, you have a brawl with some goons in a hallway to protect Warden pressures interns into giving convicts the death penalty, and run into the chapel to confront the Joker solo again. It's not about Batman learning to accept help, it's about reinforcing both that Batman won't kill the Joker, and that's why the Joker is obsessed with Batman. 2 points that we really don't need reinforced. It feels like it's deliberately inviting comparison to the end of Arkham City. He even paraphrases Joker's quote about doing all these crimes before morning.
I killed your girlfriend, poisoned Gotham in hell. It's not even breakfast. I've killed a lot of people. I brought the city to its knees, crippled the police force, and it's not even time to unwrap our presents.
It seems like a comparison that they shouldn't be making, because the comparison looks unflattering in their favour. The end of Arkham City was damn near a masterpiece, and this just feels like a cold attempt to copy it without understanding what it was doing. It feels like a story that was rushed, and given what we know about how this game was made, it probably was. I don't think that this is the game that everyone on the team wanted it to be. The bugs and glitches, of course, but the story falls flat at the end in a way that isn't uncommon for video games, but is unfortunate nonetheless. But there is a spark of passion and creative energy in this game that convinced me that it's more than just a quick corporate cash-in. I don't know that I ever would have loved this game even if it was done perfectly. There are creative decisions like the focus on the Joker and the general edginess of the presentation that I don't think ever would have worked for me. But there is a great version of this game out there somewhere, and I would still really like to see it. Despite its less than stellar reception, Arkham Origins did receive a fair amount of post-launch content, the first of which was Origins' own Asshole DLC, an in-box code that lets you play as Deathstroke in the challenge mode, which, all things considered, is a significant improvement over the Catwoman situation. The second DLC was a curious little piece called Initiation, where you played as a younger, still-in-training Bruce Wayne as he goes through a series of trials to determine his worthiness to train with a martial arts master. Although if you can already beat everyone else in the dojo, I'm not sure what more you can teach him, to be honest, but hey, I don't want a ninja assassin dojo.
Now get to the kitchen and prepare tea for all of us.
The third and final bit of single-player DLC was Cold, Cold Heart, and more than just some extra challenge maps, it was an entire new campaign, taking place a week after the events of the base game on New Year's Eve, and condensed into a smaller part of the city. And it's fantastic, genuinely the best part of the whole game, and almost no one has played it. According to achievement completion statistics, only around 3.5% of players have even started this DLC. Stats like that aren't uncommon for DLC packs, but for this one especially it hurts me because it's so good. Cold Cold Heart covers the origins of Mr. Freeze, but more than that, it takes all of the criticisms of Arkham Origins to heart and builds out a new experience that fixes all of them. It has a more cohesive and focused story, a bunch of new and interesting game mechanics, and most importantly of all for me, it looks gorgeous. It's kind of amazing what the addition of colour and lighting effects does for the game world. Cold Cold Heart takes place in only 2 districts of the open world, on the new side of town, and even though nothing but a bunch of ice has changed in the world, it feels completely different and new. Detail in the design and artwork of the city that were unnoteworthy or easily missed in the base game have been highlighted to show that the details were always there, you just missed them the first time. Like the carved faces on this bridge. They've always been there, but the grey colour palette of the game made it so they didn't really catch your eye. Now they're being accentuated by the lighting. The lack of fog can make the edges of the map look a little bit off, but overall the extended range of vision makes the city feel much bigger and much more alive. It's a massive improvement. The colour also helps make the icy invasion of the city contrast more against the sky. The wall of ice blocking you in just feels that little bit extra cold. The DLC starts in the warm comforts of Wayne Manor and things get colder and bluer as the DLC progresses. Because hey, you don't get colder and bluer than Mr. Freeze.
Forget to pay your heating bill, Bruce?
Happy New Year, everybody! Where do you think you're going? Sit, don't move!
Mr. Freeze might be my favourite Batman villain. He's a character with so much pathos, and while I don't love his design in this game, the story certainly does him justice. It's a loose adaptation of his origin from the Batman animated series, but I've never actually seen it before, so this was all new to me. Like the base game, there's a mystery bad guy to discover, and while the twist isn't hard to see coming, it's executed in a much better way than the base game. Bruce is hosting an event at the manor honouring a man named Ferris Boyle with the Wayne Foundation Humanitarian of the Year award when Mr. Freeze along with a bunch of Penguin's men crash the party looking for Boyle. It's unclear what they want from Boyle, but between trying to get to the Batcave, keep his identity hidden, and rescue a bunch of party guests from the goons, Bruce isn't able to stop Freeze from taking Boyle, and he's pissed.
Targeting someone like Ferris Boyle, it's sickening.
I know you'll bring him to justice, sir.
I'll see this one wheeled into Blackgate on a gurney.
The twist isn't hard to see coming, especially if you're familiar with the source material, but I think that works in the game's favour this time. Batman is making assumptions about Freeze's motives, assuming that he's just another thug out to cause harm, where the truth of the matter is much more complicated than that. The DLC ekes out that reveal a little bit longer, mostly to pad out the length, which is fine, because it's mostly fun padding in an extra padded batsuit. The Extreme Conditions batsuit is extremely silly, but I kind of love it anyway. It's so bulky and it makes it feel like you're running around in a bat Teletubby costume, but they do introduce several new ice melting mechanics, which are a nice spin on things. And it's a nice integration of the idea that one of Batman's powers is that he's just prepared for literally any situation. There's a charm to this DLC where the fluff in the middle is still fun because it's punctuated by snappy dialogue and story intrigue. It lets the mystery sizzle while you and the characters speculate on exactly what's going on. So even though your progress is blocked off by a big wall of ice that you need a special 3-part ice drill to get through, you can still have a chat with the frozen penguin about it.
You're gonna get me on this damn iceberg?
You're good right where you are.
But you can't leave me here! I'll freeze to death!
Not my problem.
Oh, so you come back to Cloud, have you? Oh, I'll hang you with that bloody cape, you hear me?
Penguin and Freeze have a big falling out, and it feels like a nice little nod to the clear animosity between the two of them in Arkham City. This is probably why he had Freeze captured all those years later, because he's very good at holding a grudge. And it's not just the small details that look forward, there's many elements of this DLC, and Origins in general, that start to feel closer to Arkham Knight than City. It may look silly, but the XE suit does share a resemblance to Batman's high-tech suit from Arkham Knight, and the interior of GothCorp, the futuristic labs with the distinct almost 80s opulence, feel very similar to the whole aesthetic of Arkham Knight. There are a few features from this game that show up again in Arkham Knight. The detective mode holograms that recreate the scene would become a key feature in Arkham Knight, and the electric gloves, or thermal gloves in this DLC that charge up as you fight, feel very similar to Arkham Knight's fear mechanic. It's hard to say where these similarities come from. Did both teams come up with the same ideas, or did Rocksteady see some of the value in this game as well? After all, while Warner Bros. Montreal didn't make Arkham Knight, they are credited with several of the game's DLC packs, so clearly they have a knack for it. Inside GothCorp, you finally discover the truth with a long investigation in Victor Freeze's laboratory, the place where Mr. Freeze was born. Despite GothCorp's public image as a humanitarian company, the People's Company as their slogan goes, Boyle was of course having Freeze make cryogenic weapons, with the promise of funding his attempts at finding a cure for his frozen wife's terminal disease. A confrontation in the lab went wrong, and Freeze's body was altered to only being able to survive in sub-zero temperatures. So then Freeze is after Boyle for revenge. Not quite. Boyle still has his wife locked away, and Freeze is doing all of this to rescue her, since only Boyle has the access to get where she's being held. The tables have turned, and the person Bruce thought he could trust was actually the biggest villain in the room. It's an interesting contrast to the base game, where the point was that Bruce needed to learn to trust people, where here the person that he does trust turns out to be the villain. It's a different sort of lesson this time, an equally basic one, but an important one nonetheless. That things are not always so black and white. Every bad guy in the base game is pretty straightforwardly bad. Hired assassins, organised criminals, jokers, and so even if they could be overwhelming for Batman, he is right to punch them. So going into this story, he assumes that the same must be true. Only a monster could do the things Freeze has done, and so he should be treated like one. The truth is more complicated than that. Bruce cannot paint all of his antagonists with the same brush. Yes, Freeze was definitely in the wrong, starving the party and teaming up with the Penguin like he did, but he was doing it for a noble, very understandable reason. He was not the root of the problem here, only a consequence of someone else's terrible actions.
I'm sorry, Master Bruce. I know you had high hopes for what Ferris could do for Gotham.
That doesn't matter now. Victor's plan was never to kill Boyle. He needs Boyle's security access to get his wife out of GothCorp. That's all he wants.
And now, you're going to stop him?
I have to.
And are you still going to need that gurney?
I am. But not for Victor.
It's an important lesson for a young budding crime fighter to learn, especially after a run-in with the Joker. Not all of them are going to be monsters. You need to handle each problem as it comes along. There's a boss fight with Freeze, and it's not as good as the original, obviously, but in the end it's Batman that has to save Freeze and his wife from Ferris Boyle, and you have to break the ice as Boyle chips away at his health bar.
Take a seat, humanitarian.
Cryogenic containment restored.
I'm sorry, Victor. I can't give you peace, but I can give you justice.
And that's the end of Arkham Origins. It's quite sudden, but it's still a satisfying ending to this DLC. It just sort of leaves you wanting more. Cold Cold Heart is a glimpse into the game Origins could have been. Just a little bit more polish and a better structure makes a world of difference as it turns out. There were rumours of a sequel to Origins for years, another game set between this one and Asylum, possibly focusing on the origins of Robin or Two-Face. But of course those rumours would turn out to be for Gotham Knights instead, which I haven't played yet, but from what I've seen it's quite different to what Origins 2 might have looked like. I do think Origins is the worst of the Arkham games, but being the worst in a series of great games, There are worse things to be. And I don't think it deserves its forgotten place in game history. It's a fascinating game to talk about just because of the constraints placed on it and the strangeness of its creation. It could have, and maybe should have, been so much worse than it is. I really do love an underdog, and while I can't bring myself to say that this game is some hidden gem or a secret masterpiece, I'm still kind of rooting for it anyway. It was trying things. They didn't always work, but it was trying, dang it, and that's important. Origins is the beginning of Arkham, the story of how madness came to Gotham. But at some point, that madness bubble has to burst, and when it eventually does, it might not be the people you were expecting to burst it. There's one last stop on our Arkham journey, the biggest, longest, and most complicated of the bunch. So I hope you'll join me next time for Batman Arkham Knight, the end of madness.
Maybe I can give them something to believe in. Maybe he can give them something to believe in.
Thank you very much for watching, and a very special thank you to Joe LD and all of my patrons for supporting the thing I like to do. If you want to join them, you can find the link in the description below, as long as the likes, the subscribes, the comments, and a link to my Twitter. We'll see how long that lasts. If you want to stick around, I have several other videos that might interest you. You can click here to see the start of this series on Batman Arkham Asylum, or if you want to get really wild, you can click here to watch me defend She-Hulk and destroy my credibility as a critic.